that too. Officially called to order. Now I may ask for public comment on non-agenda items.
There are none.
Okay, that's good. So approval of the minutes, and I just wanted to give them a quick.
Well, I will first make a motion to approve.
Okay.
This I started reading the tooth map all the
I'm sorry, Alton, I can't approve them yet.
No,
until
no
I get
worries.
a chance to look at them.
No worries.
Because I did this on Sunday. Oh, I'm sorry.
I appreciated the overview though. I didn't need it.
While I'm doing this, and it's taken a really long time just to get to board docs, maybe you could introduce the usual cast of characters that you're now the usual cast of characters that we have at our meetings.
Joined us. Let's start with the ladies who are online. I'll let Rachel introduce herself first.
Of course, Rachel Chenkoy here with Fuel Mineral Lab and Associates, proud alumnus of PCC, and we present you as your municipal advisor.
Hi, I'm Ann Lamarina-Rolim. I'm a partner at Norton Rose Fulbright, and I'm Bond and Disclosure Counsel to the district.
Travis Rights. I am with Raymond James, and we are your bond member.
Okay. This is what I want to see. Units. There we go. Okay. Now. Okay, I will second that motion. Is there any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Have we heard from, who's our third one? Tammy, right? Have we heard from
We're
Tammy?
having some issues hearing you all.
Okay. Have we heard
Right,
from
same
Tammy?
here. It started to be very clear, and it just happened.
Oh,
It's the owl.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, it's far away.
Um,
Sometimes when you mute,
I mean, I
it
did-
works.
That's much better. Good.
Oh.
Yeah, good.
okay, so we are on item B1, first series GL bonds. Candace, I think I look to you and then you do whatever you want to do with it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right, so I think Rachel's gonna pull up the presentation. We're gonna walk through slides with you all. Please, this is a lot of information. I know there's going to be a lot of questions, so let's take our time as we walk through it. And so if there are moments where we want to pause and ask a little bit nuanced details, we can do that. We've got all of our friends in the room to assist, and I'll kick off with some overview of what we've been doing since the last board presentation. Thank you. All right, you know us, we just introduced ourselves. All right, next slide. All right, so we last were with the Board of Trustees of the Budget and Audit Committee on March 7th and then again on the 15th to begin the work for the pre-issuance related to our Series A GEO bonds with an assessed value $20 for every $100,000 of assessed value. So what we've been doing since that time, we've been meeting to continuing the structure around our Series A bond structure, as well as the projects that will constitute. We'll walk through the cash flow summary as well. Anne has helped draft all the various legal and disclosure documents, which you have in your packet. We actually had to consult a tax counsel regarding planned projects on the expenditures. There are certain projects that have to be excluded based on use. So for example, the project that came up as consideration, or that we had to meet with the tax professional, was the Galloway Plaza. because we lease those facilities out to a third party who then generate revenue, and so we can't use tax exempt bonds to construct those facilities under the tax law and code. So we wanted to make sure that we were making all of the right decisions. So we did some additional work with the tax council and made that determination, which is why the $11 million has been carved out. And then we wanted to continue to monitor the municipal bond market. I know we have a lot of questions related to that, so we have some information there. We have been working really, really hard on our credit rating presentation, which we did last Monday now? Yes.
Feels like a lot longer.
Yes, it seems like it was yesterday because we spent a lot of time preparing for that presentation. So we did both Moody's and S&P and have our preliminary ratings back, which we are very proud and happy to get those, because a lot of our calculations and things that we were projecting were based on those ratings, so we're excited there. And so then we presented, and yesterday, let's see, Moody's we got at 10 a.m., went back and forth with them. We got S&P's today. So they should be launching their published sort of announcements in the coming days, and then I'll work with Alex to get our announcements out for PCC as well. So a lot of work just around the structure of the Series A bond financing deal that we're going to walk through this evening. I wanted to share a little bit about what constitutes the projects related to Series A. So this is $130 million, about $100 million of project-related money that will clear after we prepay the COPs. So if you think about this in context, this is going to be our smallest of the series when we go out to bond every 2 years. So we plan 2025, 2027 are next, and those are at $145 million. But because we're actually prepaying the COPs, it lessens our project-related funds that will be made available to the district. And so what we did, and we can go into this later, but this is a cash flow projection for you all, month by month, each year. So 2023, second page is 2024, and then into 2025. And the projects that are listed here are just at a high level on the screen. So we've got the STEM building, and these are design work for these buildings, because we're certainly not going to be able to construct both a STEM and a student services building with the first issuance. But it'll get us through all the architectural DSA work. We've got Galloway Plaza. We've got some major sort of renovations in the E building related to seismic retrofits and other activity that needs to happen there. The mirror pools, Sexton Auditorium. We've got a ton of site utility upgrades, and so the district has really, it's 100-year, many of our buildings are 100 years old, and so it's built on that infrastructure. And so there's quite a bit of sewer, storm drain, that we've had some issues with her. When rain happens, buildings leak, things overflow, and so we're working to really focus on the core infrastructure work. It's not the most exciting work for people to say, yay, right? We've got $130 million. What does this get us? And we may physically see Galloway, and we may physically see the mirror pools, but these other pieces are, projects that there's a great deal of architectural or DSA work or infrastructure work that'll precede that. The other largest piece that I would say that it will be visible for the campus community is the demolition of the W building. So that's scheduled in 2024, which then would potentially become the area that we're going to pave and then bring in portables so that we can start offloading some of the buildings that need to come down, like E, transitioning some folks from E to Science Village or our science student services colleagues from the L building into our portable situation. So those are the high level projects. Of course, all of the projects are listed here, but that constitutes the bulk of them. There's some solar projects related to some of our parking lots, but that's the first issuance that we're hoping to cover. At any time, though, we can always adjust, so we are going to need to, we haven't convened the bond work group and are intending to do so in the fall. That's when our faculty are back, and we'll work to get that group convened and start making some decisions around some of the sequencing of these pieces, or at least some confirmation that our thought process around sequencing kind of works and that we haven't sort of missed anything. But we're making sure that these are the key projects that we've been envisioning and speaking to, particularly in preparation for 100th. So some of these pieces will be a part of that celebration. All right. Now we're going to get into Series A, GO bonds. Now this is the meat and potatoes. I think Ann is going to cover these pieces.
Yes, so in your packets, both here and when it goes to the board, you'll receive a big stack of legal documents. The most important of which, in our agenda item, we provide an executive summary that describes each of the documents. But the district resolution is what the board will review. It authorizes one or more series of bonds, and it approves certain form documents, which we also include for your review. It sets forth the security provisions of the bonds. It requests that the County Board of Supervisors adopt their own resolution so that they levy and collect taxes sufficient to help pay the district's bonds. And then the resolution also authorizes certain district officials to do any and all things necessary to proceed with the sale and issuance of the bonds. That's the various documents they'll need to sign. The time of the sale of the bonds, the district will enter into this bond purchase agreement with Trennis and his firm at Raymond James. That's the date where the district will lock in the interest rates. And depending on market conditions on that date, certain district officials, such as Candace or the superintendent president, can decide whether to proceed on that date to go ahead and sell the bonds. The official statement, or the preliminary official statement, that is a very large, maybe 200-page document that includes all of the information related to the district, the bonds. It's similar to a prospectus. So any potential investors will review that document. It includes the district's 2022 audited financial statements and a lot of information. So for securities law purposes, it's very important that district staff as well as board members review and advise us if there's any incorrect information or if there's any material omissions that you think a reasonable investor would find important when deciding whether to purchase the district's bonds. Also, in order for the underwriter, Trennis, and his team at Raymond James to enter into an agreement with the district to purchase and sell their bonds to the open market, the district has to enter into this continuing disclosure undertaking. So on the date that the district ends up receiving its bond proceeds and gets to go and build its construction projects, that isn't sort of the end of it. The district has to promise in this document that so long as the bonds are outstanding, the district has to continue to inform the market about its finances, for example. So every year, once the board approves the district's audited financial statements, that needs to be posted to this EMA website where any investor or any member of the public can review the district's finances. There are also certain material or listed events that the district will need to inform the marketplace within 10 business days. For example, if it were to default on any payments, or if it were to have a ratings change, whether that's an upgrade or downgrade, there are certain listed events that the district will need to promise to tell the marketplace if these events occurred. So that's just a quick and dirty preview as to all of these documents that you'll receive in your packets.
No questions? Brian? So,
Have this, and I'm gonna have to move a little closer.
Sure.
you close with it?
Yeah, no, you're good. You keep rolling, but I'm just gonna come up here where I can see
Since
them.
the natives don't, blend that.
Camera kind of follows, it's great.
So, I think we covered this at the March meeting, but this is kind of an update from then. So if you're selling bonds, right, you wanna say, hey, what is the market like? So, we've got 4 slides on the market, this is the first one. So this is end to end, so as of calendar year, right, January to today, this is a graph of what's called MMD. MMD, if you recall, is the benchmark rate just for tax exempt bonds. Okay. There's an individual rate for every year in MMD, 1 through 30. We'll get to that as well. These are the major ones. 2-year in blue, 10-year in gray, 30-year in black. Okay. Beginning of the year, so make it easy. The beginning of the year, 30-year rate, 358. This is set every day, once a day at noon. Okay. 358. Last time we saw you, that benchmark rate was 342. Okay. It's now 350. End to end, not much change a year. Seems odd in a year where rates are kind of seem like they're bouncing around. Then the other two, which are a little trickier to describe, just because the 2-year rate is higher than the 10-year rate. So it started the year roughly the same. 10-year was 263, 2-year was 260. As the years gone along, the 2-year, because the Fed's raising the short-term rate, right? The rate that appears in the paper all the time is the Fed funds rate. That literally is an overnight rate, but it affects really all the bonds from 0 to about 2 years. Pretty heavily. So, as you can see, when we saw you at the Ides of March here, it was 259 was the 2-year rate. The 10-year rate was 240. Today, 2-year rate's almost 3, 10-year rate's 259. Seems odd. Seems like the longer you invest, the higher your rate should be, just because it seems like there's more risk. But the yield curve was called inverting. We'll show you what that means and what it looks like. But this is end to end for the calendar year, what rates have done. And then the reason it's important is because in years 1 and 2, roughly 30% of your par is going to be paid in that. We'll show you the graph of that as well. It has that toothbrush look to it, right? 30% of your principal is going to be repaid in those couple of years, but almost half of it is paid in years 21 through 29. Okay, long term. Okay. Next slide. Who's in charge of this slide?
Rachel.
Okay. Ms. Chanqui, next slide, please.
She's muted.
She's working. She's seen it.
But she's not frozen. Can she hear us?
Ann, can you hear us?
And moving.
It was, we couldn't really hear Travis's part, but I don't know if it's because he stepped away from the
From the mic?
microphone.
Okay.
Okay, so Rachel, can you go to advance to the next slide?
Of course.
I'm doing the Phil Donahue
Sorry,
thing.
we've heard that presentation.
Oh, okay.
They heard me talk all week. They were sitting there, had me on mute.
Yeah, close to him.
Get this clown all week.
Alex, can you move that all down close to him so they can hear? That's what it is. They don't need to see us.
Everybody good to go?
Yes.
Okay.
Next slide.
So then, again, this goes back to an update, okay, of where rates have gone since we saw you last. The numbers we put together before were based on the market, even though we weren't presented until March, what, the 8th? I think we gave you rates as of February 24th. Okay? So since February 24th through yesterday, the Fed's raised the short-term rate 50 basis points, 0.5%. Okay? Now you would think this should be 50 basis points higher, right? The reason it's not is because the market really kind of anticipates those changes. It doesn't wait, it kind of prices them in, and quite frankly, the market's been pretty close to right for the last 6-8 months as far as pricing them in, right? Because the Fed's giving the market signals, hey, we're going to bump it a quarter, we're going to bump it a half, whatever. Right now, it's a little more uncertain as far as what they're gonna raise it tomorrow. The belief is that, I think it's 75% poll believe it's gonna stay the same. So no change tomorrow. That's the consensus. So like I said, you'd think that the rates would be 50 basis points higher. They're not. Since we saw you, short-term rates are a little bit higher, right? Highest one's 10 basis points. But most of our rates, since we saw you, these are the benchmark rates, the MMD, okay? Every year after, 10 years, is down about, 7 to 10 basis points. Okay? So roughly flat, since we saw you last. This is a pretty acceptable range, I would think. There's no questions, Rachel? All right, this is the monster one that we presented at the board meeting. So, this again is MMD. Remember, MMD has a rate for each individual maturity. Okay? So there's a 1-year rate, a 10-year rate, a 20-year rate, a 30-year rate, etc. Okay? Each individual maturity. What this graph represents is those maturities and the range of those individual rates for the last 30 years. Okay, since 1993. So what I mean is, for the 30-year rate for MMD, the lowest it's been in the last 30 years is, 127. The highest it's been is 695. Okay? You blame my parents. I can't point that out. So that's the 30-year. So then the same logic down here, right? 1-year rate, where I said rates are a little higher because the Fed's been messing around with the short-term rate. The lowest it's ever been is 0.05, which I still can't believe. The highest it's ever been is 495. Okay? Just the 1-year rate. Right now, we are sitting right here. This is just the 1-year rate. This is the average rate for the 30 years. Okay? Same goes on this end. Okay? And all the way through here. Okay? Right now, we are presently here at 350 for MMD. 30-year MMD is 350. The average for 30-year MMD is 415. So we're 65 basis points lower for the 30, 66 for the 25, and so forth. Okay? So if you look at that and say, hey, I'm borrowing money, is this a good time to borrow money? Well, when's a good time? A good time is right here at the bottom of this bar. But timing that is extremely difficult. So what's your next benchmark? Okay, well, in the scope of this bar, if you're in the middle of it, so the average for the last 30 years, which is about what this bar is, you would say that's a reasonable time to borrow. Okay? Which would suggest that given current levels, it's not the greatest time, it's not down here, but it's a reasonable time. If that makes sense. Any questions on this? I know this is the biggest one. You've seen it now, I think, at least twice or maybe 3 times. So. A lot on there, but it kind of tells the story to say, hey, look, are we in a good part of the cycle or a bad part of the cycle? And all this hoopla about interest rates, especially tomorrow, you'll see a lot. This kind of puts it in perspective that, hey, they can go an awful lot higher than they are now. They're not the lowest, but they're definitely reachable. Next slide, please. So, timing-wise, if rates are low or reasonable, this is, I guess, why we've been planning the sale for summer. Okay? We know historically how many bonds have been redeemed in California. This is not national, this is just California. So summertime, June blue, July gold, August black, okay? Dark blue, whatever it is, darkest color. Redemption months, okay? This is the par value of bonds redeemed. This is summer of 18, summer 19, etc. Okay, so this was last summer. Okay? The reason there's a spike in June of 22 is the state had a big redemption. Okay? But August, as you can see, which is coming up, and we plan to sale for, I think it's July 18th, I think now. Just trying to get like a week ahead of that Fed meeting, which is July 25th/6th. Okay? But August 1st is a big redemption month, so we know a lot of the bond funds, a lot of the individuals, a lot of what's called separately management accounts, they're all going to get a lot of bonds redeemed. Typically, right, because bond funds have pure mandates, right, the ones that buy these bonds, it's to invest in California bonds. Okay? The California Tax Exempt Bond Fund for Franklin Templeton, $15 million fund, that's their mandate. okay? BlackRock funds, they hold these, that's their mandate. Alliance likes Pasadena's name, it's the same mandate over and over again. So when they get bonds redeemed, it's very easy for us to go in and say, hey, you've owned the credit, they just got their ratings affirmed, buy it again. But we know generally that, hey, even if they don't, we know that there'll be an awful lot of people in California getting their bonds redeemed, and therefore trying to sell in like the third week of July to close the first week of August, that money will be there. And that's just the bond money. That's not even the money that gets allocated to tax exempts this time of year. So that's what we're trying to get in front of. Is that all?
So you're saying there's a seasonality to these, I mean, there's a seasonality to the bonds, it isn't, for better months, right?
Yes,
As
sir.
opposed to things that happen.
Right, as opposed to external events, yes, sir. So there's two seasons typically in my line of work. One is January, because when it's time to sell bonds, right? Typically small rallies in July and August, I guess, and January. Why? Because January one exists, it's called the January effect for us, okay? A lot of tax selling in December, right? People just tax plan. Selling bonds, taking losses, taking profits, whatever it is. They come back in January. That's number one. Number two is, remember, muni bonds pay interest, not principal, but interest 6 months apart. So it naturally suggests that July is a good month. June, July, August are good months. The beginning of the year should be good, that's 6 months prior. Right? So they're getting coupon payments in, they reinvest those coupon payments back into more bonds. Okay? That's why January effect for us is good. Summer's always been good, since I've been doing this. I don't know why people, issuers don't just wait until every summer, right? Because it's so glaring. I mean, a lot of it just comes down to construction need, right? Everybody wants to get construction during the summer, well, it happens to be when the rally is typically. But as long as I've been doing this, John, this is just been around. So we're just trying to get in front of that. Yes?
I don't understand the word redeem, because when I think of
Sure.
redeem, if I'm gonna redeem a bond I hold, I'm asking for the entity to pay me,
Right.
right? So when you say redemptions happen, that means all over California, the country, the people that own bonds in other school districts, municipalities, are saying, okay, district and municipality, give me my money.
They're not saying it. Remember, there's two things going on. One is there's scheduled maturity. So for example, Measure P, with you guys. Come August 1st of this year, you will repay $7 million in Measure P bonds. It was regularly scheduled for August 1st of 2024. So when you sold them several times, because you had 7 or 8 issues outstanding in Measure P, some were refinancing. But August 1st was the scheduled repayment date. You've collected taxes from people, right? April and December and April. And the April payment is going to be used to make this August 1st redemption. But it was scheduled already. When you sold the bonds, and they bought maturities, like you go to invest your money, okay, I want to invest for 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, whatever it is. But once you invest for 20 years, but the districts, and you guys, you retain the option to redeem your bonds, so call them early. You want to wait till 20 years, 30 years. You want to be able to refinance them, right? So when you sold your bonds originally, you retained in most cases I looked at, you retained your option to refinance it within 10 years' time. And you did, in most cases. And maybe a lot of cases. So what they did was accelerate that maturity forward. Now they're not going to get a hold until 20 or 30 years. They did 10 years with them. And you're calling it what's called calling it off, redeeming it from them. But it's your option, not theirs. What you're referring to is a put, and in bond, your kind of bonds, you don't have that phrase. Not in this one. They have it, and you guys don't. Most, I can't think of one in California that's done it recently.
Okay, so what's happening in?
In August,
Yes.
you are repaying as scheduled principal to people that hold bonds. That's number one. And 2, bonds that you refinanced. Last refinancing was what, when we did that? 2020. Those bonds, the maturity got accelerated from whatever it was to this year.
So is it that these funds who have direction to invest in California find that, oh no, now we're low, we have less money invested in California bonds than we thought because of the accelerated
They
thing,
know.
and we need to buy more because that's our charge?
That last part is absolutely correct, it is their charge. They know well in advance though. When we did that 2020 refunding, we filed what's called a notice of redemption. So even though, it's not like a car loan, right, or a home loan, where when you do a refinancing there, you're literally, the old loan goes away and the new one comes in the same day, okay? In municipal bonds, which is typical, you have that right to refinance. However, when you sell new bonds, you gotta wait like 3 years to call the other ones. But what pays those 3 years is not the taxes. When you sold those refinancing bonds in 2020, for example, we took that money, we bought a bunch of investments, treasury bonds, basically. And those treasury bonds pay those old bonds until, for those 3 years, and redeem them and repay them in full this year. Does that make sense? It's okay, I can go through it again, come on.
No, it's okay.
No, no.
I'm gonna tell you what I heard, and you can tell me it's
Yes,
I
sir.
heard it wrong.
Yeah.
Because there's so many people redeeming bonds, they have money, and they have to buy new bonds.
Yes, that was
So
my,
there's a large demand for new bonds, so it's a good time because of the large demand, it's a good time to be in the market.
in
to sell.
August, just because
To sell
so
them.
many California issued bonds make a payment in July?
August
Oh, they
first.
pay
Yeah,
August first,
so
okay.
every bond issue we've sold this year in California from Raymond James, it says G school related geo bond, pays on August first, every year. Yeah, February, right, interest payments in February, interest and principal in August. Yeah. We saw a lot of them.
And why isn't there then a spike? Where's
January?
February? Well, February,
So
August.
January, February, remember it's for a different reason. You don't, it's, the buying and selling that goes on in January is typically for tax reasons, right? Because people at the end of December really start around Thanksgiving, they'll just start selling tax-exempt bonds for tax purposes. But then they come back in January and start all over again, buying again. But that phenomenon,
So August is a good month, or you're saying the end of July, because people have money in their accounts and they want to spend it. And
reinvestment.
our bonds, okay, reinvestment, and there are lovely bonds waiting to be bought.
Yeah, get the store window.
Okay,
Yes, we're getting in front, so we're trying to sell the 18th, the close by the 3rd of August, so that they know those, whether it's an individual or a fund, they know August 1st, they're gonna have that money sitting there to make that investment. Right?
Your target is July 18th?
Yes, sir. It's like a week in advance to the next federal FOMC meeting, which is 25th, 26th. We're trying to get as far in front of that as we can.
But we have a timeline slide at the end, so we can walk through the next pieces.
Yes, sir.
Since we're talking about redemptions.
Yeah.
and This is fun talk.
I'm trying to read myself up here. It's not working very well.
If we pretending we're not going to refinance into that, which we likely will given what we did for Measure P.
Right.
The sale of these bonds, they won't be redeemed until our arc of time is.
If you do nothing, your bonds will repay all the way for 29 years. If 8, 9 years from now, rates drop enough to where refinancing makes sense, then you will redeem those bonds and then replace them with just a new loan, a new lower rate loan.
And
What's the callable period you said, 2 to 3 years, is the halfway 2 to 3 years?
No.
They're callable?
It depends on how much time has lapsed. So we sell bonds today, you're retaining your option to refinance, but bondholders are going to be guaranteed, no, it changes by the time we sell. Right now, it's 9 years. Traditionally, it's been 10, but what's happened in the last couple years is investors will give you that 1 year basically for free. So why not take it? Right, they're not going to charge you a higher rate.
So
if
you
take
can't,
it.
if interest rates went down 4 years from now,
Yes.
you can't, you gotta wait 9 years.
It depends on how much, because what,
You
this
can buy
is,
it now.
yeah, so what's happened is you can no longer refinance on a tax exempt basis and do that. When you sell bonds now and and you call them 5 years, you redeem them 5 years later, okay? Has to be done on a taxable basis, only taxable basis, not tax exempt. That law changed, oh my gosh, when was it, right after Trump came in, so 17, I think? 18?
2017.
Yeah. So you can refinance, but it's probably gonna be 8 or 9 years hence. Thank you.
You have another slide, but back on your average.
Rich, can you back up, please?
So when you look at that, does that, impact how you skew the offering? And I mean by that, you know, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, well, let's not offer a whole lot of 1, 2, 3, and 4 year funds, and let's offer more longer term, where we're in a better, relatively, appear to be in a relatively better position.
Right. So we have a slide on how we structure that toothbrush graph.
Okay.
But the only tricky bit about that part is when you sell a bond for 1 year, okay, and it's at 5%, that sounds like a lot, okay? But remember, it's 1%, it's 5% on, let's call it a million, to make the numbers easy, so $50,000. But now, if you extend that maturity 2 years, that rate better be 2.5%, right? Otherwise, right, 2 years at 2.5%, it's the same 50,000, right? So the rate better be half. If you want to do just 1 more year, that rate better be half. And so therefore, that logic will hold the longer you get, right? Because over time, you want the loan to be, you want to repay the loan as soon as you can, just because the cash going out to pay the coupon, right? Just to pay the interest. And so to keep a loan short, because it's got a high rate, that is the way I would do it, which is the way we've done it. So the
I
tax.
did not understand what you just said.
Okay, so your argument is, hey, let's borrow way out here because rates are.
Well, you have a diversity, you're gonna go across the spread, I just was wondering, the question was, how do you, it doesn't have to be perfectly even, how are you thinking of distributing it across the curve?
Rachel, flip to the toothbrush graph. No, that's it.
Sure.
Or term, but
Alright, it's back one more.
so is mine. So this is how we intend to structure it.
Okay.
For 2 reasons. One is your taxpayers have authorized you to sell $20, right? $20,000, okay, tax them at that rate to repay bonds. So we're going to take it up to that rate for the first couple of years. Okay. Now, your argument is, hey, these rates are higher than these rates in here, so why don't we just sell it out here? And my reply is, well, you could, but you can be paying interest for, let's call it 5 years, as opposed to 1 on that same dollar. That makes sense? So that means that these rates would have to be 1%, right, to pay the same 5%, right, 1% over 5 years, to pay the same 5% you would pay here. That's what I was trying to say.
I mean,
And we want to issue future bonds.
Mhm.
So,
That's the second
So we
reason.
would,
Yeah, we're trying to leave capacity, because what ends up happening, when people put themselves in a real pickle, which is what Mount Sac did with their lift bond issue, or bond measure, is they had these, I worked with them, so I don't dare be too much. But they had a very rosy view of the world as far as where rates were going to be, where assessed valuation growth rates were going to be, and then they passed the measure, I think it was 08, and they locked themselves out, and they couldn't sell the bond they wanted to a year later. So Rachel, God bless her, structured your election so that A, the tax rate is high enough, but we're only projecting 3% growth in AB, which for this area is ridiculous. It's like 5.5%, I think. But that will make sure that we really never reach $20. That's number one. Number two is you'll always have access to your capital. You'll never lock yourself. This bar will never come down here, and now you've got a problem with accessing our capital. But this is structure-wise, John, this is why we do that. So we kind of capture it.
and I'm sorry, when you say access to capital, on July 18th, you're selling 130 million
Yeah.
across the spread,
Yes.
aren't we sitting on 130 million?
Yeah. Next slide, Rachel.
So what do you mean by access to capital?
What I mean is, so right now, let's say we had already sold the third series, right? Done through the red, the black, and the blue bars.
That, I can understand how it impacts Series B and
Right.
C and D.
That's-
That I get,
that's what
that I
we're-
get, but,
That's what I
okay,
mean, that's what
all
I
right.
mean. And we wanna be able to make sure that we have access to it, because we've seen people get locked out, it's not pretty. And
So Trustee Martin, if I may interject for one moment. So if the assessed valuation didn't grow at the amount we projected,
I get it,
and if we're exceeding the $20,
you can't sell.
well, I mean, by law, you can go up to $25, but, you know, you promised the builders you would stay within $20. In the Mount Sac example that Trennis gave, they were exceeding the $25, so they were unable to issue their following series of bonds. By law, you can't exceed that $25. So on the date of closing with the assessed valuation, if you're already exceeding the $25, then you're unable to issue your next series of bonds.
So if, for example, property values were to decline,
Yes.
though I, we don't expect that, but if they were, then we would be in the same thing.
No? We'd be in
You could have,
better shape.
well, probably, if property rates went backwards, they went negative, right, all of a sudden, this bar would be up here. Now, by the time years 1 and 2 came and went, you'd be, let's call it somewhere in here. So you'd still have access to your money. But maybe getting to that final Series D might be a problem. But because it's 7 years hence, hopefully, you'd have the benefit of time.
And also to add, this assessed valuation, right, this is our most educated estimate at the time of issuance, but you will have the opportunities to refine these projections every time you issue, right? If say in 2025, when we're ready to have similar conversations for the next Series B, and the tax-based environment and historical growth over this next 2 subsequent years look very different than what we see right now, we'll have the opportunities to refine them. But I think that's why I think in some of our prior presentations, we looked at your historical assessed valuation growth, because looking at the historical trend help us better project, and that's where the conservatism is built in, because over a 26-year history, PCC's tax base has grown on average more than 5.7% annually. And right now we're projecting 3%. And recently, Trennis and I looked at just LA County, countywide. They published their preliminary assessed valuation projection for countywide, and that number is 5%. But we're still projecting much lower than that at 3%. And we believe that's sufficient cushion, and we'll get to, if it's not, we'll get to refine it in 2025 when we issue the next bond. But that's also one of the reasons why we want to take up the tax rate capacity for the front end years and reserve as much of those capacity as possible for future series.
So you understand, if we, this bar represents 3%, so if it ends up being 5, this bar will be somewhere down here. Is that helpful? Any questions? Alderman, any questions? Good.
I mean, this is the same slide we've seen before,
Yes, sir.
right?
Yes.
So, yeah, it's.
Except for the taxable piece, that's the only
Right.
shift in terms of the
The actual.
slide, yeah, but the
Yes.
slightly.
So why don't I pick it up from there if there are no other questions on the market slides that Trennis just went over? So thank you, Trennis. He just went over some of the high level, right? Where the market has been since the start of the year, where supply and demand looks like, and even historically, the range of our benchmark MMD rate. So all those combined, what does that mean for our Series A bonds? I think before I dive into the number, just start with high level assumptions. I think the continuity of our planning remains. So there are some of these assumptions that stay the same. We touched on a few of those. For example, 3% assessed valuation projection annually for the next 29 years. The other thing that's the same is we have the same $20 per 100,000 tax rate limitation at noon. As Ann mentioned, legally you can go up to 25, but we have been planning and structuring the bond based on that $20 tax rate. The same conservatism that we built into the interest rate as we saw this slide last, we still have conservatism in there as well. But let me dive into what's a little different. Of course, we have updated all the interest rate assumption as well as that conservatism, that cushion that we built in there. So last time we were in front of you, the rates were as of early February, and we added 100 basis points or a full 1% on top of those rates. If you were to issue bonds in February, the scales, what they would be, we added a full 100 basis points on top of it. And then just to show you not to jump ahead of myself, but one of the bond statistics that people often look to when they look at how much is the interest cost for their overall financing, that piece of statistics they will look to is the all-in true interest cost or ONTIC. So back in March when we presented to you, that number was about, let me move it right here, that number was 4.60%. And right now we have updated our scales based on the latest information working with Trinity's office. So that scale was as of May 16th, 2022. And we continue to have conservatism, and what we did is we added 50 basis points. Knowing that now we're closer to the finish line or that July 18th date that we plan to price the bonds, so we thought 50 basis points of a cushion is more reasonable, still assuming 5% coupon. And what that transpired into that ONTIC statistics line item, we're looking at right on top of what we were previously looking at. So that number right now is 4.62%, which echoes what Trennis was presenting earlier, right? The market, we've seen the rates increase, decrease, but roughly we're at the similar level when you look at the financing's blended interest cost for the entire 29-year of borrowing. So those are the high-level assumptions. If there are no questions on those, I'll dive into what's different. For example, that particular taxable component, right, that we talked about earlier. And that $11 million out of our total $130 million. So $130 million remained the same based on the cash flow that Candace mentioned earlier, that she and her team has been diligently working through. But then the Galloway Plaza project, conservatively, is a $11 million project. And because of the management contract with a non-governmental entity, per tax council's advice, we're issuing those bonds as taxable, so that we can comply with all the tax-exempt tax law requirements accordingly. So those are the differences, but looking at the total, we're looking at roughly the same numbers, as well as the rest of the numbers when it comes to day-to-day, final maturity date, all in interest costs, as well as par amount and other information that are on top of it.
Rachel, when you say taxable, how much of that is taxable? Like, how much will it be taxed? Is that a
It's up to the
question?
individual, the taxpayer.
That's the $11 million.
Okay.
So it's not you guys, it's the person that owns the bond,
Right. They're being taxed.
on interest.
How much, what's the difference in interest rates between taxable and non-taxable?
So the 1-year rate for your bond we're talking about now is about, I wanna say it's about 560. Just for that 1 year.
Just the taxable or non-taxable?
Taxable. And to put that in perspective, the 1-year treasury is 520.
And what's our 1-year non-taxable?
When you're tax exempt,
Yeah. What would be the equivalent of 560?
if it was tax exempt.
It would be, with a 9-year call, it would be 311.
But I would like to say that the rates aside, the spreads, of course, the taxable bonds, right, trustee Martin, because the owners who own those bonds, their interest or investment earnings would not be both federally and locally tax exempt. So generally speaking, those would come with higher interest costs. But then that's also the reason why we're looking to structure the taxable component, that 11 million and change, the most efficient way possible. And by that, we mean to repay it as soon as possible. So we have run that through Fulbright and Tax Council and confirmed that we will be able to structure the taxable component with a 1-year maturity. So that spread is as minimized as we could as we plan the structuring.
When we issue a taxable bond, are we basically in competition like with corporate bonds that have a similar credit rating?
It's a good
Or
question.
is there a difference?
It's a good question. There's, the universe of taxable buyers is almost infinitely larger than the universe of tax-exempt buyers. So the answer is yes, we're in competition with corporates. However, a corporate, what's the best way to say this? A corporate AAA issuer, the default rate on corporate AAA issuers is more than twice all the default rate of muni bonds put together. What I'm saying is, yes, we're in competition, but people that look at a corporate AAA or even AA, right? They would say, hey, there's a AA Pepsi
plus or
and
whatever we
here's
are.
AA Pasadena. Well, they know risk-wise, despite the rating being the same, they know risk-wise you guys are way down on the spectrum.
But at that level, there's probably not a lot.
So now you're getting insurance companies, you're getting banks, those kind of people involved in buying more bonds.
And by law, the county treasurer, county auditor, controller is required to levy and tax in a sufficient amount to pay Pasadena area community college district's bonds.
Any other questions on this slide? I know we already touched on the structure, so I won't reiterate for that graph there. Then I'll move on to the last slide that we plan for the Series A bonds. I think, and the team thinks it's very important that when we're issuing each series of the bonds, we don't just stop our planning or structuring projection right there, but looking at the program as a whole. So this is the page to show you that structuring, that huge brush structure that we talked about earlier, what that would look like for Series A, B, C, and D, which is the 4 series that we currently plan for us to access the full 565 million measure PCC authorization. As you can see, based on, of course, there's a lot of assumptions, right? AB's 3% we talked about. Series A scales have 50 basis points built in. But for B, C, and D, we also have interest rate scales that are conservative in nature that we have to build in. But all those things combined, we affirm that there's no problem for us to access 565 million under that $20 tax rate based on this current schedule. And this is something that we'll continue to refine and continue to update at least on an annual basis as interest rate and as assessed valuation, new information gets released by the county. So here also shows you some of the repayment ratio, right? For every dollar that you borrow, how much you are repaying. Here we're looking at for Series A, that number to be about 1.7721, and measure PCC as a whole is about 1.721 as well. And the other thing I would like to highlight is what Candace mentioned earlier in terms of the project amount. So that's, if you're looking at the top table, that's the third line item from the top. Project amount, Series A is roughly 101 million, which is the smallest we have planned for the whole program. Mainly because we understand a lot of these is going for the infrastructure as well as design planning, and that the heavy lifting or the hard construction will likely, majority of them, to come in after Series A. So that's the planning behind the numbers that we talked about, and I'm happy to answer any questions there may be.
If we have a project delay and we're sitting on more than we're allowed to sit on, how does that work with the, I know there's some,
Yeah.
you're allowed a
So
certain period
by
of time,
law,
so much
for
cash,
tax exempt bond proceeds,
Yeah.
the district reasonably expects on the date of closing that it will expend all of the bond proceeds within 3 years, or at least 85% of the bond proceeds within 3 years. If there are construction delays, and if, knock on wood, the district's audited by the IRS because it has bond proceeds sitting there for longer than 3 years, then we would just have to show proof or evidence of construction delays and so on and so forth.
Because you're a public body, right, you have constant board updates. What she's talking about is what Fortune referred to as a paper foxhole, right? So that when you're taking fire from the IRS, there's reasons, legitimate reasons why construction might be late. It might be weather, something as simple as that. It might be DSA approval gets delayed. It might be you change your academic objectives. You say, hey, we don't want to start there, we want to start here now, and change that. So, or you're counting on a state bond measure for matching dollars, right? Like you got for the Seraphim building, and it didn't pass or something. It can be all these reasons, but as long as there is a history of why construction got delayed and it's documented, then not good. You have been doing this. It's terrible. So Prop 39 is what, 20 years old now?
Yeah.
And I've seen 2 cases where
In the meantime, are you allowed to keep the arbitrage you might be making on the gap?
the interest, yes, sir. The arbitrage has to be
The interest, yeah.
Yeah, anything over bond yield should have to be rebated back, but right now you wouldn't be.
But yeah, every 5 years we would do an arbitrage analysis to see whether any rebate is due. But, you know, like recently, because interest rates have been so low, a lot of districts haven't had any.
Okay.
I think do we have a time crunch to?
What direction they need from us on this topic?
Are you sure? I just want to be mindful because I know we need tentative and.
I have a 6 o'clock meeting, but I think this is more important.
Okay.
What direction do you need from us on this topic?
So, we need, really quickly, here's the timeline that you were asking for before, Trustee Martin. So today is the 14th, we'll come to the full board. So today we're asking for your recommendation for approval for the bond resolution authorizing us to sell in that July timeframe. And then you see sort of these other moments. So the 21st is our board meeting. We've got the 11th and the county levy resolution. 11th through the 14th, the 17th through the 18th, that's that pricing piece when we plan to sell. And then the 19th, all the work that happens after the post-sale actions. And then the screen is being covered, but August 2nd and 3rd is when we would close and then also prepay the COPs. And so our hope today is that if there are no further questions, that you all would move to approve and then recommend to the full board approval at the 21st meeting.
Okay, is there a motion to do that?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, move to second. Any further discussion?
Just really quickly, I like the point, the bullet on where we are, the step versus due diligence opportunity. So I figured I did read some of this massive document. And the one thing that I did notice, and this is maybe something that we do know about for sure, is that it says that the board elects the president and vice president to serve 1-year terms each December. It should not be December, it should be July, based on how our board operates. That's a small thing. That was proof that I got into what page? I don't know.
Yeah, in the
A2.
preliminary issue statement,
Yeah, in the dealings, yeah.
is that a comment to the preliminary issue
That
statement?
was, it's a very, very small comment.
Okay.
Very small.
Okay, and I think we're planning for that too, because we're gonna decide who's signing all of the closing documents when you have your reorganization meeting.
The other recommendation could be that we could just simply say that we elect annually.
Might be easier.
So, thank you.
Okay, let's call the vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, passes unanimously.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you, Rachel, thank you, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Now you're good to
See you
the
next
budget.
week.
All right, see you next week.
Those 4 slides we saw, if I could get a copy of those, I'd appreciate it. Just
Oh,
try to
of course.
remember.
We'll follow up, I'll send them to, and then she can send them out, the
Thank
full
you.
slides.
Yeah. All right. Next, we're on 23-24 tentative budget.
All right. Let's get started here. So we're gonna walk through, so just for context, thanks so much, Ken. Appreciate you. The tentative budget, it's recorded,
It's for the,
so I'm assuming.
First reading.
Oh, so I can close out of this, okay, I wasn't sure. All right. The tentative budget is really our first, it's really, it helps the district meet its fiscal obligations starting July 1st. So we haven't closed our books, right? We continue to close our books through now and the end of the fiscal year. There's a good deal of work that goes on in July. The governor's budget has not been officially signed or adopted, and so what we use is the May revision budget details and priorities to project a tentative budget summary so that we can start our business operations starting July 1st of 2023, and then just give you some projected fund balances. So there are nuances in the tentative budget. We'll talk to some of the questions that were raised, but it's really not finalized. We do that in our September adopted budget summary presentation. So let me walk through a couple of the pieces around the May revision and what the state and then the Chancellor's Office is really signaling as the priorities for the multi-year roadmap. So it's a lot of focus on equity, student success, a lot of the programming, whether they're one-time funding dollars or whether they're ongoing dollars are going to support those initiatives, as well as enhancing the system's ability to prepare students for California's future. These are broad, sort of sweeping, kind of ambiguous goals, but then they come out in specific program details that we see from a budget standpoint. Some of those pieces. So the largest pieces in the May revision was the cost of living adjustment. We've got to find another name for that, but that's what it's called today, the COLA adjustment, which in January, if you recall, well, you may not recall, but the original percentages that we were working with, the state had signaled an 8.13% cost of living adjustment. The May revise has that now increased to 8.22%. There's a lot of conversation, concern with the size of the COLA. Many are giving feedback that it's just too high. There's some advocacy going on at the state level that it shouldn't, it should be around 5%, not this 8.8, anything higher. And the reason why is there's a lot of misunderstanding in terms of how those adjustments are applied across the full apportionment number, and that it's intended to cover adjustments in a variety of different areas, not just salary and benefits. I think it also then adds to sort of this thinking process that COLA is actually applied to all categorical funding areas or funding areas, and it is not. And so there is some thought process around that. And what we're seeing, as we've seen with the Chancellor's Office in the state, is just a shell game. So they say the COLA is higher, guess what, we're going to take from your deferred maintenance. And so we'll talk a little bit about how that particularly impacts PCC, but that's currently what's been signaled at 8.22%. That's what we are working with. That's what's built into the tentative budget. So we talked about deferred maintenance. So because of these increases in some other areas, the deferred maintenance will be decreased by approximately $213 million one-time Prop 98 general funds. So that's significant for us. I mean, it's significant for the districts across all community colleges, but it's significant because for many years we've received very little deferred maintenance. On the last 3 years, we've had some greater commitments from the state and more deferred maintenance dollars, scheduled maintenance dollars come in. But as you sort of adjust on the COLA, we're seeing that they've taken from deferred maintenance as well as the COVID block grant, which is the next slide. But let me talk a little bit about student enrollment and retention. The chancellor's, the state has continued its commitment related to helping districts fund enrollment and retention types of activities. And so all sorts of strategies and things, a lot of which, so pick an Alex, he's in the room, since we dedicate a lot of those funds to go to marketing and sort of really creative retention efforts or programming efforts to push not only enrollment higher, so Angel City is a great example of that, right? That's a recent, but then retention efforts with any of our programming to help support supporting students here, so whether it be tutoring, whether it be our success coaches and things like that, all those pieces, retention events, continue to support those efforts. So we've seen a consistent commitment on behalf of the governor and the state on these efforts. We've been signaled, I mean, there has been conversation that these efforts, they're going to want to see some return on investment. I think is the easiest way to say that. So I think that's why conversations around no COLAs unless after 24, 25, you're no longer eligible for COLA increases after the funding floor base is set in 24, 25, and then it becomes a 25, 26. And you're no longer eligible for those pieces until you achieve, I mean, there's still conversation about what that number is, but until you achieve your pre-pandemic numbers. This sort of signaling piece is like, we're gonna continue to fund these pieces, but we're gonna expect to see some returns there. Yes, sir.
Sorry,
Of course.
this number, this slide is helpful because it tells us what the funding number is now for this, but for deferred maintenance, it's a decrease of 452 from what?
I think it was 8.
I remember seeing a big number.
It was almost double.
They reduced about half.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
8 something, 40 something.
That's helpful, thank you.
All right, and then what really people are freaking out about is this COVID block grant. So okay, so we actually received these funds. I mean, they came to us in January, February of this year. I think we actually received the
whole $9 million earlier.
and now they're signaling that they're going to potentially be taking a portion of that back. Yeah, so because they're doing a reduction in the COVID-19 block grant. So again, it's the shell game, right? So, okay, we'll give here, but we need to take it back from, so the decrease of $345 million in one-time Prop 98 is definitely going to impact us. We will be seeing a reduction in our portion of payment based on whatever number. Right now, they've said it's almost maybe half. We might lose $5 million of that, $4 to $5 million. All right, but with that
I
though,
have a very simplistic question. When you say we're gonna lose $4 to $5 million of that, are you referencing this is money that was promised that we haven't used yet, that they're now gonna say we don't have?
promised, received. Fortunately, we hadn't used it yet at this point.
So now we're gonna have to send it back.
Correct. Or they'll just reduce our.
Hopefully they'll be benchmarked to another program. They'll say, hey, instead of you having $9 million for COVID block grant, you have 4, and then these other programs will get an increase.
Yeah, so, but, here's the positive. The positive is that I think we're trying to proactively watch when the state is signaling these changes. I think we've done a good job of that. We prepared the tentative budget with those things in mind, not only with, so here's the projected sort of the state apportionment numbers. Lottery is lower based on enrollment. State mandated claims is about the same as last year. Non-resident tuition is about 9.5. Our normal pass-through of CalSTRS on behalf payment, and then the categorical student funds and others. So this is what makes up our total revenue. Our expenses, as you all are very aware, the majority of the unrestricted general fund budget is related to salary and benefits. And so we're very, very thoughtful when we see any reductions on apportionment, because a lot of that is in salary and benefits. We've reduced supplies and materials a little bit based on some of our projections. Our operating expenses, that's mostly like our contracted sort of, whether it be IT, facilities. There's a host of district contract services. We always pass through a little bit on capital outlay, and then we have some outgoing transfers, which we will show here. There we go. So, okay, so the transfer, I think, Trustee Martin, that you asked about, the 500,000, that largely goes to fund our parking fund, which is always something that we pre-fund and for campus police. And it's always one of those things, so in prior years, so last year and the year before, we were able to, so a lot of this covers parking, fees, you know, we charge students for fees, but if you remember the last 2 or 3 years, we've made parking free. And so that what we've done in previous years is that we've calculated that loss into COVID funding, where we can recoup any loss of revenue on pieces, but this is just proactively transferring those funds over. Child Development Center, we always transfer funds to cover not only lease costs, but some uptick in their costs. Capital outlay, we always have a small portion related to project-related expenses that are cannot be covered by bond activity. And then that 87,000 that you see there, that is actually our payment to the county for the election fees. Yeah, so so we've already paid it, but we owe, and so you'll see that transfer in and out. And then always our pre-fund of our property and liability self-insurance as well as our OPEB self-insurance fund.
Sorry, could you explain, the last few I got, could you do 500,000 of transfer from the restricted general to the restricted general fund?
Yeah, the parking fund is a restricted fund.
Okay.
So it's from the unrestricted general fund, it's contributed to the police and safety fund.
I can go back on COVID just real quick.
Sure.
When they initially offered this block grant, isn't there some contractual signing between us and the state? Aren't they contractually obligated for whatever amount?
They can take
Yeah.
whatever they want back.
Whenever.
They can even take some of your apportionment back if there's no.
They can plan an additional deficit factor. It's a shell game.
Even if it's a signed contract, and there's no way you can.
It's not,
So-
it's a firm promise. It's
Okay,
not
it's
really
not,
contractual.
I'm just saying, like, so I was working on an NEH grant today for somebody, but you know, it's a signed agreement with NEH for a certain amount of money to do a certain thing. I would think that these kind of things, isn't there a similar document where there's actually something that somebody signed, or I guess not?
Well, there's probably a clause in there that says. we can
There's
change
not
At
a
the end of the day, we
formal-
all work for,
And I get it.
yeah, so they can pull the money.
No,
They
I believe
have.
you, I was just curious.
They have.
I was just curious if we're signing an actual
No.
contractual on something like, here's extra money for COVID to do this, and here's all the strings, and.
No, there's no contract that either the state has signed or PCC signs that says
Okay,
this is
that was
what
my
we
question.
So the NIH grants, so those are grants that we have to apply for, and it's actually contractual, and those we do sign. These are kind of like, things that
Firm
state
promises.
allocate,
Yeah, I
yes,
said that.
state allocate, and then they are written into law, but then they have, they can elect to change what they promised in the following year.
No, I was just interested if there was a physical.
The only thing they promise is that they can audit us. That they promise.
The state is reminding us that we are nothing but them. We are them.
Yeah. Which is why we're careful about what we can promise without knowing or receiving, which is the
How long-
unfortunate part about that is that we received it, so, you know, not everybody's in the same situation, they may have already expended some of those funds. We had,
How long do they have to claw it back?
So they usually would like us to spend what they give us within 2 years. Yeah, but the state is not real firm on, not unlike the federal grants where there's an exercise period between 3 and 5 years, we must spend it all or else we owe the money back. The state is a little bit more lenient. They usually ask us for a plan of how we plan to spend it if we can't spend it within 2 years.
But our money our state money, most of it, is at risk for 2 years of being diminished.
this actually came through as a grant, so it's a little bit different than sort of like the apportionment dollars. But that doesn't mean that, remember 2 years ago now, we had those deferred payments, remember when the state wasn't going to pay us? So it's a similar sort of concept. They can make any adjustments that they need in order to cover the state as a whole. And then we then are on the hooks. I think that's why initially we had those conversations about getting a trans. Remember when we thought that our cash flow might be problematic? So we're nimble, agile, I guess, and just try to anticipate as best we can. This is just a quick review for you all in terms of our care, institutional, and our student portion. So we've done a really good job. We recently were approved for the no-cost extension. And so the CARES funding will last us, or can be expended through June 30th of 2024. I think the student portion has to be done at the end of this year, and they already have plans on doing that. So there's about 5.2 million remaining balance in terms of the total funds here. So you see all the HERC 1, HERC 2, HERC 3, the minority, the care states pieces. And then our HERF, now this is going to change.
What will we spend that on?
There's a couple of things. So we're probably going to still cover student health fees, materials fees.
And I'm sorry, student health fees, is that health insurance?
It's like the student health fees. We have a student health center here, so
Yes.
that'll cover. So each student gets charged in the enrollment process a fee, and so we've covered that for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
It's only for the services that we offer here. It's not insurance. So if they get injured on campus, they can go to the student health center. We have vaccination. They have basic stuff. But it's not like insurance where they can go there
Yeah,
for
but
any.
even if they get hurt on campus, we would offload them. I mean, we have an insurance program that would cover us, but it wouldn't run through the student health center. We would run that through our Keenan Safe program. But nonetheless, they can go in and get those. So like Mindy Throop, who's the director over there, she also helps with like helping us with distribute like remember we're transitioning to COVID tests, like individual self-care tests. We're still purchasing those, so that's an example of something purchases that will.
give you.
Have you checked those expiration dates? Everybody's always careful. Like, is this expired? Is it going to tell me it's your? So we've got COVID activities still happening in terms of safety protocols and purchases there. Some professional experts who are still helping, part-time helping areas. Some of the fees pieces that, what helps do UPass, I think will still be covered by CARES Fund. Trustee Wong?
Oh, sorry, is that, okay. For the CARES fund, there's no more funding coming, we're just spending down.
Correct.
And so, the pieces that we're spending down on, like things that we've been covering, once the money is spent down, we are no longer covering those pieces. So that's the parking, that's the student health fees, that's the UPass?
UPass is covered by, we're gonna continue to cover, those aren't so expensive, we feel confident covering that. I think that's about $250,000 that we,
The UPass?
yeah, so we can cover that for both fall and spring. The thing that we can't cover anymore is the $200 bookstore credit. That's millions of dollars that goes to the bookstore related to that piece. So we're gonna have to end of that. But materials fees, student health fee, And parking, we potentially may still, we're doing some projections now based on where we're at in our funding to see if we can offer those for students in the fall and spring. Because we always go both, we don't wanna offer it more
Yeah.
for the fall and not for the spring, so
Thank you.
that's what we're doing now. Now, this is that COVID block grant money, remember that we said we received, so this is gonna go down, that's at $9.9 million.
This is from the state.
Right. This is COVID block grant money, that's that money we were talking about. But we have a good plan, and the financial aid department, has done a really good job in crafting their plan and figuring out how they're gonna expend the remaining, a little bit under $1 million of her funds that still need to go out to students. And those should be expended by the end of this calendar year for the fall semester.
What are some of the things that the student act portion has covered?
The student portion has to go direct aid to students.
So it's direct, all the
That-
direct.
It has to go,
Okay. So
that's
the
money
loss
in
would
their
be no
pocket.
more direct aid.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, money in their pocket. So that's tentative budget. Again, we haven't closed the book, so we'll get into greater detail during the adopted budget pieces. But this is just the framework that we put in place so that we can continue our business operations on July 1st. So we have a budget to start with. So you guys will see the adopted budget in September. COLA, your question about COLA.
Yeah.
COLA was baked into the 6% for all bargaining units are included in the calculations for in the tentative budget.
Okay.
And I think I know the answer to this, but I just wanted to confirm. The capital outlay fund, the net activity is because we're paying for this revenue.
Yes.
The negative.
What was built in for part-time faculty health?
1.5 million.
And then, there was one of these where one went up and one went down, it looked like a switch, like you changed insurance companies or something.
I think those are just the planning percentages that we get from, as the starting point.
All
from
the
this.
counselors have located, perhaps. So
Yeah,
that's
no, it was related to SUI. There was something with, like, SUI went one way and work comp went the other.
Oh, correct, yeah, so SUI is a statutory rate, that rate is dictated by the state. And then workers' compensation, because we're a self-insured district, so those are actual costs that we have to collect paid from our paychecks.
Actually, probably gonna be coming to this group about a potential, loss, loss program of some of our workers' comp pieces that we may take to you all next month. We're kind of exploring and selling off some of our liabilities.
So I guess this was my question, when I was looking at, SUI in total, across 21, 22, you're looking at 750 million, 700 million, 700 million. And then in the 23-24 tentative budget, it's 167 million. So that's a pretty big drop. Did the state drop the rate?
The planning percentage that we receive from them,
Right.
I mean, that's pretty significant. On the flip of that,
the workers'
the
comp.
work comp, which was 2.2, 2.1, 2.1, under 2, and I realize this is a function of payroll and that's varying in here. And then all of a sudden it pops up to 2.5. So it kind of did the opposite. Again, is that a function of a higher rate or more compensation?
It's more compensation, and because, we gave a 6% increase in raises, so that had a positive, that had an effect onto how much we charge for workers' comp. It's a percentage of payroll.
All right. That was that question. Where where would I find part-time faculty health benefits? Is that, it's not,
It's
it's
built into
embedded in
the
teachers and
benefits, yeah.
it's embedded in all the different individual categories under teachers or?
Yeah, so at this moment in time, we budgeted about 1.5 million, it's a rough estimate because we're still having, open enrollment for, so we're, at this point, not sure how many faculty members will be eligible and elect to receive this benefit.
And where would which of these expense categories would I,
It would be in the 3,000s.
so it's in the 35, it's kind of embedded in 3611, well, we're looking at health benefits.
Yeah, so 34,
So that's not health.
3,400.
We're looking at 34s.
Yeah. So
So it's part of the reason why it's been around 7 million and now it's 8 million 5.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we'll continue to adjust this estimate as we
Okay.
adopt it, because by that time, fall semester would have been about to start, so we'll have a more clear picture of how much enrollment will be accounted for.
Because HR is currently asking faculty who's elected, who's interested in signing up.
And that window closes,
Right now it's about August.
that's all better sense of that.
Yeah, a little better since then, and also that may be a fluid window because, we may have, class schedule changes,
Yeah.
some get more.
Eligibility will be determined based on the census dates.
And it's the state's coverage, those numbers, that's pretty much set at this point in terms of what portion the state's covering versus,
Yeah, we pay first and then when we go back and apply for reimbursement.
okay,
Yeah. But their percentages are, it's 50%.
it's 50%.
50% of what we pay,
Right.
which would essentially be the 40%. We'd cover
That we
40,
cover for
state
that.
40, and then they're covering 20%.
And that's not baked in yet because we've applied for the reimburse.
We did bake in half of.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Because I thought that percent reimbursement was based on how much other community colleges got, that it's a fixed amount. And so if every community college is pulling money out, it's possible we could get a lower reimbursement.
It's the reason why we went for 50%. So you could either elect to go 50% or you could go 100% coverage. We elected for the 50% coverage because the 100% coverage actually has greater requirements. Like we would have to offer the exact same programs if we elect for 100%. So we have to cover their family. So you'd have to give our part-time faculty the same benefits as the full-time faculty.
And that they would only cover 50% first, and then whatever money's left over actually go to every other district.
So we felt safer starting with the 50%, and then I think that also, I mean, that's a negotiated item, so probably in team would do that, but
Yeah, there's
we felt
also-
comfortable with the 50% starting point.
For budgeting purposes, we always want to be budget conservative, just in case it happens. So we budget at the lowest benchmark, which is 50%. But there's an opportunity, if there's money left over in the system, to become reimbursable at a higher percentage. Yeah. And so far, we haven't heard from the state that they're going to move that kind of cheese.
Okay, not yet, not yet.
Very good. Yeah.
I have one last question. I'm trying to remember our reserve requirement. It's a percent. It's 18, right? Does the tentative budget meet that 18% reserve requirement?
Yes. We could never build a tentative budget without meeting that requirement because the board actually has to, by a 2/3 vote, say that we could dip below the reserve amount.
Anything else on budget? Okay, so I think we are at fiscal accountability resolution.
Yes, and this is just the starting point, so you just see it's going to start with. Oh, no.
Oh, you want us
well,
to approve this?
Yeah, for
Okay,
recommendation.
so we need a
good notes.
motion that
So the board needs to approve the proposed budget.
we recommend this to the
You
board.
would recommend this.
Mm-hmm.
So moved. Rock, paper, scissors.
In second? Yes, okay, discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Nay? All right.
This is a new idea that Jessie is going to walk you through.
in the finance street. So, fiscal accountability, so, what that is really, we have the opportunity because, certain ESCO allowed us to, and also we have the internal structure to be able to do that. So what that is, what fiscal independence or fiscal accountability is it gives PCC the power, the ability to issue our own checks. Or own our own payroll checks. So at this moment in time, what we have structured is we pay for our own internal finance system. But at the same time, because we're not fiscally accountable or fiscally independent, we must work with our LA County counterparts, Office of Education. Link our system to their system in order for them to issue checks for us. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of intricacy on making these two systems talk to each other and match everything together. And then the county system is really designed to service district that does not have their own internal finance system. So, it's so that you can see that the design process, they're trying to make a system that will work for 80+ districts, but not necessarily serving the needs for Pasadena City College. So what we're trying to do is smart people that came before me that purchased Banner, which is our own current ERP system, that has the capability of not only processing our finances, but also give us the ability to manage our financial aid processes in-house and manage our student services in-house, and all of these different components that are unique for community colleges into this one platform. So throughout these years, we've been very diligent of making sure this platform communicates well amongst each other, and at the same time, before we take the step to become fiscally accountable, fiscally independent, we still coordinate with our county counterparts to be able to process the information that we need to pay our bills, process our payroll. So what we're starting this idea is to, in stages, sever ourselves from the LA County and to fully operate on our own ERP system, Banner alone. And so this will be the first slide. And the second slide just shows us our.
So what you're telling me is that in the future my checks won't come from my county, but they're gonna come from PCC directly. Okay.
And it'll come that much quicker.
Yeah.
So the second slide gave us a little bit of background of what statute gave us the power to do so. And then we can go ahead and advance to the next one. So here comes the rationale. So I talked a little bit about the rationale to really do so. And I have to emphasize it's not really a cost-saving initiative because we already purchased our internal system. So we already made the investment. So now, 9 years later, we are finally at a stage where we feel comfortable where we are going to realize efficiency, gaining of efficiency, the gaining of all the different benefits that we invested into having our own system. And so some of the things that the county is not able to provide for us, as I mentioned, is they're not able to help us with student financial aid. But at the same
Wait, what?
student financial aid.
What do you mean they're not able to help with
Like
financial
dispersing
aid?
the
That's-
money.
They don't
Yeah,
disperse
they
our.
cannot disperse. So the county system is really designed for K-12 schools. Yeah, so K-12 really don't have any need for student financial aid, no scholarship. So a lot of our peers within the state, either they have, like us, purchase our own ERP system and then have it connect to the county, or they bought a module just for the student financial aid. But that could be problematic as well because they have to be able to feed those financial information into the county and have it work on that end. So
who issues student financial aid?
at this point we do.
Oh, so
Yeah.
we are already.
We are already there.
Okay.
Yeah. So what we're trying to achieve here, because we're already doing so much work in Banner already. So having our county counterpart is really an unnecessarily added step. And it slows it down quite a bit because the county, because they have to cater their system into 80+ districts, so they go through their own check and balance system. And sometimes you could hold up payment for 3 months to 6 months. And
So a great example would be, remember when we were considering before, when we were gonna, enter into the agreement about Arcadia,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Remember, it was like, that's not no quick, you know, like in the market, sort of real estate market, you have to be quick and nimble to be able to put in offers, right? We can't do that, so LACO will not issue, so like the initial deposits, they won't without formal board action. They have to see, so there's nothing that can happen without, like, we'd have to call a special meeting, and you guys would have to approve, and then
But
we
wouldn't we
can't enter.
still need to do that piece of it?
Not if we were cutting our own checks.
Well, she's asking, shouldn't we still need
Have
to
we-
do that? Do we want you going out there dumping a deposit check?
Sure, I mean, there's good and bad, right? There's good, but somebody has to sign that here. I mean, so at the end of the day, it handcuffs you all a little bit in terms of just how quick we can move on something.
yeah, so in a way that as soon as you have the meeting and then have a discussion and come to an agreement, I on the other end can print that check tomorrow and then be able to deliver to the escrow officer.
Yes.
Yeah, so, but at this moment in time, when we work with the county, we have to transmit information to the county, and they have to review it, and then they hold it up, and then they go through their own check and balance system. So sometimes the back and forth can be months, weeks, and it's a lot of unknown. So it might not be able to meet our business needs timely.
There's no just-in-time data. I think that's the other piece that I know working with LACO, that there's no you can't pull all the reports all the time. You have to wait for them to update their systems.
Right. And a lot of, and so I'm glad that Dr. Nurse brought up the point because in order for us to work with the Chancellor's Office, the State Chancellor's Office, which governs us as a community college, they ask for a lot of data. Student data, enrollment data, geographic data, all kinds of data, and census data. Those are not information that the county system is able to provide for us. But our internal system, Banner, it tracks all those from the student service end of the module. So then we can do that easily, generate a report and upload it to them.
I have two, actually, I think pretty short questions, but what does ERP stand for?
Enterprise Resource Platform.
Okay, it's just that, okay, technical.
Education.
Okay. And then,
I thought it was education records.
It does that too.
I'm already sold on this, but I'm just curious, what, because you have a listing of districts that are fiscally accountable and already fiscally independent. Are there other community college districts that are where we are right now? And if they don't have an ERP, how are they reporting data to the state and how are they issuing student financial aid related things?
Correct. So, well, most of the districts around California, so it's interesting because I came from the CPA side, so I work in a lot of districts up and down the state. So most of them are in similar state as us. They purchase their own ERP system in-house. And then to be able to kind of mitigate some of those deficiencies that their county office of ed is not able to provide to them. The only district that I know of that is using the county system is Cerritos. But then they do purchase a separate module for their student financial aid.
Got it.
Rio Hondo does too.
Rio Hondo does too? Yeah.
I know too well.
I have a question. So we'll need to staff up with people to handle this. What does that do to our faculty obligation number?
So, great question. So we're being very cautious. We're doing them in stages. So at this stage, we are electing to go fiscally accountable first. And what that means is we're going to issue our just regular checks to pay vendors. And then, and that does not take much sort of staffing than what we already have. Yeah, but
We actually already issue checks today on the student bank side with our trusting agency. So issuing checks out of Banner is not something that we're not familiar with or that we don't do today. We just do it out of chart D versus chart, or chart L versus chart D, the district
I
chart
don't
of
know what
accounts.
those are.
So the district chart of accounts is like the main sort of, when we talk about the unrestricted general fund. Trust and agency is more of the accounts that are set up where, a great example would be when we receive the revenue checks from Primo Nosh, or the revenue checks from, the Rose Parade, those go into trust and agency, and those funds can be spent anyway. Our athletic programs might have events and fundraising things, and that goes into their trust and agency accounts. Our Center for the Arts might have programs in the theater and charge admissions and ticket sales, that goes into trust and agency. So they currently, Student Business Services currently cuts checks
Yeah.
related to those funds out of Banner today. So we're good at it, we just are not, we haven't been approved to be able to do that on the district side.
Now,
Well,
what
my
do you do?
question was, I know we need so many tutors and so much student support, and we're always right up against that number and staff. So you're saying we just really will not need to add much?
Not for fiscally accountable. If we become fiscally independent, we would need to then come forward to the Board of Trustees with a staffing plan and a cost of what that would look like for the district. Fortunately, our faculty obligation number is on the rise for next year, right? They're hiring currently 58 new faculty positions.
With our enrollment numbers?
It's not based on our current enrollment numbers, it's based on 17-18 numbers. But hiring the classified doesn't impact our faculty obligation number, those are two different.
It impacts the 50%.
That's
what
different,
she was
that's
asking.
not the fund, that's the
Oh, I
50% fund,
confused
that's not the
that.
fund.
Okay,
That-
you're
that-
right, I confused them.
I knew what you.
Okay, good.
I'm sensing a conceptual approval to explore this further. One of the questions I was asking is, it would be nice to see a high level, and by that I mean I don't need every month detail, like on your
Sure.
cash flow you gave me every month, that's a lot of detail, it doesn't need to be that detailed. A high level as to potential cost and or savings. So, do we pay the county a fee to do this? So we'd be saving that fee, but there might be additional personnel, but there wouldn't be any new ERP system, you know. So, just besides the non-financial benefits and the time sensitivities and all of that, which is a nice argument, it would be good to see some high-level assessment
Yeah.
as to what it may or may not cost or save.
We
In
can
terms
do
of,
that.
and most of that, I'm guessing, are gonna be people, because somebody's gotta do it.
For
Yeah.
fiscally accountable and eventually for fiscally.
Yeah,
What I think
mean,
we're initially trying to propose is just the first step, which is accountable. So I think we can take into your feedback at our next meeting, we can give you, so let me back up. In order for us to be fiscally accountable, there needs to be a board resolution authorizing, saying that that's okay, that we can start the process with the county. Because we actually have to be approved. We don't just get to say, we want to be fiscally accountable. We have to go through an application process with LICO, right? And then they have to approve us, and then we go back, right? They do their own independent audit, and then they give their recommendations to county whether or not we meet the criteria. So I think at our next meeting, for this group, we can include the high-level projections that you're asking for, and then if that makes sense to you, then we could put the future board resolution on either the July or the August
Okay,
meeting.
I would appreciate seeing
Yeah.
that before this is going to the board.
Sure.
Because as much as I'm supporting the concept,
Yeah.
it's important to see the detail.
Yeah, it makes sense. We weren't suggesting that this go to the
Yeah.
board meeting, this
Oh.
next meeting. No. This is just to start the conversation with us, our
So you don't need any action.
This is informational.
Okay,
My,
I think then we're on PAR's update.
just really quickly, I understand, I mean, the concept part defined it a little bit. Fiscal accountability will allow us to issue our own checks, but what's the difference between that and independence? Independence means that we have to issue all checks? Is that the only difference
So
between accountability?
independence would be to issue our own payroll checks as well.
Oh, okay, so accountability means it's only for vendors and things like that, and not for payroll.
Yeah, we get to choose for accountability, we can choose either
also brings in a cash management, a little bit more of a cash management component. And one of the questions that I had asked that I'd like to know the answer to is what flexibilities do we have in controlling our
Correct.
cash?
Yeah, so I can answer that question. So at this point in fiscally accountable, we don't have a lot of leeway just yet, but when we become fiscally independent, then we have control over all of our cash. So essentially, we can elect to put that into some sort of managed funds to gain a better return on our cash, because we do have a very ample cash reserve. So that would be to our advantage. The county give us a little bit of interest rate, but they keep most of it. So it would be really nice to have that flexibility to invest in something that's stable but give us better return. Yeah, but that would be when we become full.
And when you do your analysis, obviously you're guessing at percentages and stuff, I understand that, but you just highlight the guess you put in, and that would be obviously another benefit when you get to that level.
Mm-hmm.
Because as, you know, if you're sitting on a wad, you're gonna tier that into layers to get to it when and if you need it. And as you get further out in those layers, you should be getting a little better return on it. Okay, does that bring us to PARs?
Can, if there are no other questions.
Okay,
So we brought our last monthly PARS report, so they weren't ready with the quarterly because they were 2 days before when they issued it. So they issued it at the 15th of every, they're always lagging, so you just take one of
are
those.
these, oh, I
It's just one,
wanted to
yeah.
pass them up.
Yeah. we need this one. So this is the April to 4/30, so we always receive our statements on the 15th of the month, so I can pass on when we get the quarterly in
Yeah.
2 days.
I'd like to see them every quarter. I
Sure.
appreciate a month, it's
Sure.
great, but I think every quarter they must have a standard report and.
Yep. It's due in we're just, unfortunately, this meeting is 2 days before we receive it.
Yeah, okay. So when they close June or whatever.
Then they'll give,
Alright.
or May's, then they'll give us, it's always like, we just received this, and it's our April, accounting report period.
Yeah,
So we'll be sure to send that out via email, if that's okay.
That would be nice.
Okay.
so in early July, we should be able to receive actually our full year worth of summary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess that's right,
Yeah.
because it's the end of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also kind of requested because we're due for another actuarial.
Yeah.
Are anything more contributions?
We
Yes.
are, so the statement right now includes the 2.3 million contribution we made earlier, and then we are about to make another 5 million contribution. So the check will be wired tomorrow.
Great timing
The
for all these things.
statement,
Okay.
not in, the 2.3 million wasn't given in April, it was given prior.
Yeah, it was in March.
So it's included.
Alright. Great.
So as we're closing our books, we'll transfer that extra 5.
Proposed meeting schedule. I don't know where our next one is.
Do we need one for July?
If we met before, so, this is your choice. So if we meet in July, we have to meet before the board meeting, before you guys constitute your new, right? So either, if we met in July, it'd have to be before the board.
Well, I think the questions drive whether we meet, not, so
Yeah.
what pending questions do you need to air that would necessitate a July meeting?
Yeah, we could do, okay, so if we do July, we can finalize this concept and get the information and then have the resolution on the August board meeting or the July board meeting.
And then when's the next action we need to take for the budget?
Budget, it would be adopted and that's in
Yeah.
the September budget and audit committee.
So if this waited till that same September meeting, would that,
No, we
Oh,
have
no,
to,
that
we
would
have to issue with the,
We have to transfer
You
it to
need
the
to get
county
this
before
going.
September
yeah,
1st. Yeah.
it's due by September 1st.
okay, well, and then the next question is, does it really does it really require a meeting for us? I mean, I think conceptually, we don't mind you starting on this road.
Okay.
I feel, I mean,
I think the only question in my mind is how much is it going to cost us or how much is it going to save us?
Save us. And
Because
we
it
wanna
sounds
know
great.
that before maybe official board vote, but I don't know that,
Yeah, it could be placed on the board agenda without this, we can say at that meeting that even though we didn't have a official vote in this committee that we supported.
let's say we start on the road with the county and we decide we don't wanna do it. And you're already submitted, is that a problem with the county? Is there a way to
Yeah,
work it out?
we can always reverse it. They would actually much rather we do not do it because we are revenue to them.
Yeah.
This is
So,
their favorite
I
activity.
guess what I'm saying is, unless you think you can have the analysis done for July, it seems like you could start and get a conceptual board approval with the understanding that it would come back again based on the data.
Are we allowed to do that?
No, so we have to
Okay.
issue
You
a
need
board
one or the other.
resolution
Okay, then
that
let's have a July
authorizes,
meeting.
authorizes the district.
Then we need a July meeting, give us the
Can
data.
you have
and
this
we'll-
information by?
You could work through that.
Alright, so
You know,
what's the,
Okay.
I would prefer looking at a doodle,
Okay.
that'd be a little easy.
Oh,
okay,
but it's just the three of us, right?
Yeah, I have a hard time looking for my calendar sometimes. Oh wait, the meeting's not until the 19th, right, of July. Oh, then let's look at it right now. I was worried it was earlier in July, then it'd be a little more difficult.
Okay.
The week before the July board meeting?
The sixth?
No,
Oh,
that'd
no,
be-
no. So the 11th,
I think it'd be the 12th,
12th,
something like that.
Board meeting on the
13th.
11th or the 12th?
either days. It's good.
The July board meeting is July 19th.
Yeah, so
The 11th? Because if we want this stuff on the agenda and things like that.
On my
we give it a
calendar
little
says
bit of time.
PCC bond pricing, so I guess we moved it to the 18th.
Oh,
I had it down on there.
11th?
I have something from 3:30 to 4, so
On the 11th?
on the 11th.
Should we do 5?
It's fine with me.
5 o'clock on the 11th. We're in 410, so
I'm sorry?
the
410
guys shift to
schedule.
the 410 schedule. so
Keep forgetting about that.
We're all here.
You're telling me you don't want us to schedule something on Friday?
I'm more
Friday.
worried about your
Not
interviews
Friday.
and stuff, you
Okay.
still got.
It's
So
very
I know
crowded.
that's why I
Oh,
said,
yeah.
okay.
Future
No,
agenda
no,
items,
Just to
We have a lot of interviews.
future agenda items, other than what we've already talked about.
Unless there's anything that you all need from us.
Members, anything besides this? Okay, I think we're done, thank you.